All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for the March 2024 meeting of the Tewksbury Writing Group. Tonight, we're getting advice from Timothy Gager. Let me skip a few things here. So I'm just going to introduce tonight's facilitator. It is my pleasure, my privilege, my honor to introduce Dale T. Phillips, a New England writer who spent his formative years in Maine and has lived and worked in a number of places. He graduated from the University of Maine, where he studied writing with Stephen King, and he's worked for over 30 years as a technical writer in a number of major industries, translating the work of software developers into clear instructions for using computer software. Dale has published novels, over 70 short stories, collections, articles, jokes, poetry. He has appeared on stage, television, and in an independent feature film. He's also appeared on 2 nationally televised quiz shows, Jeopardy! And Think Twice. So all of us, let's give a big virtual round of applause to our fearless leader, Dale, for joining us here tonight. And Dale, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you to the library and the Friends of the Library for making this possible for everyone. So I'd like to introduce you tonight to someone you may not know yet, Timothy Gager, who's published 18 books of fiction and poetry, which includes his 3rd novel, which he'll hold up, Joe the Salamander. He hosted the successful Dyer Literary Series in Cambridge from 2001 to 2018 and started a weekly virtual series in 2020. He's had over 1,000 works of fiction and poetry published, 18 nominated for the Pushcart Prize, which is very prestigious if you did not know. His work also has been nominated for a Massachusetts Book Award, the Best of the Web, the Best Small Fictions Anthology, and he has been read on National Public Radio. In 2023, Big Table Publishing published an anthology of 20 years of his selected work with over 150 pages of new material, the best of Timothy Gager. He's the former fiction editor of the Wilderness House Literary Review and the founding co-editor of the Heat City Literary Review. He's a graduate of the University of Delaware, and he lives in Dedham, Mass, and is employed as a social worker. Let us welcome Timothy.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for being here, everybody. And Dale, thanks, and Robert, thanks for having me. I really look forward to our chat, and I look forward to reading some questions in the chat from you all, because it'd be really helpful for me if I knew what level of writing that I'm addressing as well. I mean,
we have a multitude of levels, usually from people who are pre-published to people that have put out a thing or two to some experienced folks. So I met Timothy at a literary festival where I declined to give my talk on independent publishing because there just was no audience. And Timothy bravely stepped up and he gave essentially the talk I was going to give. And I was sitting there going, who is this guy? So I started to heckle, and he was very gracious about it. Came down afterwards, and I apologized. And he's like, no, that's okay, fine. And so we got to talking more and more, and I discovered that he had this rich background in all types of literature. And I said, oh, he'd be a great guest to have for this audience, because he can give you advice on, poetry, on fiction, and nonfiction, on going for awards, on starting literary groups. He has his own writing group. So Timothy, tell us a bit about your background, please. How did you go from zero to writer?
When I was in high school, I really hated writing. I hated being told what to write and how to write it. But I was on the school newspaper and I was the sports editor, mostly because I took touch typing and they needed the copy to be typed up back in those days. And with that, I started using my creative muscle as the sports editor. I was supposed to be writing articles on the basketball team, and I was basically writing things about, what their favorite foods were and where they got their hair done. And so my writing bug first happened when, I ended up winning the journalism award in high school. And from there, both of my parents were big readers, and there was bookshelves and bookshelves of, authors that, I hadn't heard of at the time, but, I got a chance to experience all of the classic authors, the John Updikes, the, Catch-22, Steinbeck, Faulkner. And I really dove into that stuff. And my mom was an aspiring short story writer. And, you know, slowly I started writing short stories, and very slowly. In fact, in 1999, my body of work was 8 short stories. And I got very lucky in the publishing business because I sent those 8 short stories for a small electronic book to a publisher in Seattle, and they accepted it. And you know, that's kind of part of my story, but I think gaining that acceptance was a really, really important deal for me.
So that was the tipping point where you said, okay, I guess I'm a writer.
Yeah, and I started looking around and observing things, and like, how do people get published? What's the process? How do you get a book? How do you get a book in print? And I found out very quickly that it was context and people you knew and education. Like had to have a master's degree in writing was really important to like land that to land a book deal and to. So what I ended up doing was I decided to take a different route, and I decided to publish as many poems and pieces of fiction in as many places as possible and build up this resume, a resume that ended up being so long and strong that, you know, editors were apologetic to turn down the work. And, you know, that does speak volumes. If you can
Yes, it does.
get a nice resume, like, to be honest, sometimes editors are fatigued and they don't know what from what, if it's like midnight or 1 a.m. and they have a deadline. And what turns out is they'll go by the bio. Like I would read Dell's story twice because he studied with Stephen King. Like that's really, really important just to get your foot in the door.
That's why it's in the cover letters I send out and in the bio, because it's that extra notch that makes them, you know, raise their eyebrows and go, oh, all right, well, now I'll read it at least. So they'll at least read instead of, you know, 3 lines and then toss it away, which they do for most of them.
Yeah, and that's really, really good just to get viewed. And like, you know, you learn your basic little tricks in writing that like, if you don't have a first sentence that is a good hook, which leads to a first paragraph that has to be a good hook, you know, busy editors are just going to stop reading your piece, whether you like it or not, whether you think that's right or wrong. That's the process. And you know, and again, I've been really, really lucky in my journey. I've had a lot of pieces published, and a lot of it is luck, and a lot of it is skill, and a lot of it is paying attention. In terms of contacts, I started this literary series in Cambridge, Mass, called the Dyer Literary Series. And the reason I started it, it turns out like after 20 years, I'm still doing it online, but on Zoom. But what turns out is like, you know, the reputation was I'm helping other writers by featuring them. But I started the series as a total selfish quest, being that I had books of short stories and the open mics in Massachusetts were just all poetry or slam. There wasn't in 1999, there was no short story open mics. So I decided I was going to start one so that way I could have a feature and then read one of my short stories as the host. And then obviously I started being less self-serving and more serving of other writers. And the contacts I made by having features, getting to know them, these people are still, a lot of these people are still my friends today. And if I have advice, or if I need an in, or if someone wants to introduce me to their agent, or whatever it might be, they're doing it because they know me, not because I'm bothering them.
Right. Have you had any formal training in poetry? Because you're as much a poet as you are a fiction writer. Do you prefer either? And what's your process for both?
Interesting question. Thank you, Dale.
It's a several questions, but yeah, it's a.
I consider myself a writer. I never say I am a poet or I am a novelist. I am a writer, which allows me to write. I want to swear, but I want to write whatever the heck I want. And
Thank you.
like, I don't want to pigeonhole my writing because you never know what might pop into my head. My process with a longer piece, like a novel, is going to be, I need to write it at least 5 times a week. I need to sit there and not write any other type of genre. I need to get that rough first draft going and through. And besides finishing it in that way, it's really, really important that the loose ends are still fresh in my mind. Because if I start listening to my inner editor, or I'm kind of like, I'm really involved in this Netflix series, I don't need to write for my hour. What ends up happening is I will come back to the page and be lost within my own work. And I've found out later that it becomes a lot of revision. You forget things that you might have written a month ago, like the kind of car the person drove. And if you don't catch it in the revision, suddenly you have this inconsistency. And you can't always rely on your publisher to catch it either. So it's important to keep it fresh for longer work in my mind. So the connections and also the percolation of the piece, like I'm living inside the novel. The characters are living inside my head and I'm right there with them. And the percolation is super important to continue. And I always need to have, what am I going to do tomorrow, today? What am I going to work on? And that also keeps it fresh. For a poem, poems will strike me now line per line, or like feeling by feeling. If it's something that I'm feeling, or if it's something I want to discuss, some social issue in a poem, that's kind of like, okay, I want to discuss this, let's craft it. But very, very often, what happened, like this morning, I'm in the middle of, I went against my own advice because I'm in the middle of finishing a novel, first draft of a novel, but like, I couldn't get away from there's this line that just popped in my head, and the line was, grief touches the sky. And I'm like, you know what? I have one line. Doesn't mean the poem's going to be about the grief, the sky, or touching. But I had one line, and I ended up producing something based on that line. I added some metaphors, and I ended up with a pretty decent poem because I allow my brain to give me creative information, but I don't allow my brain to tell me I suck, or the story's going nowhere, or why are you writing this novel? You're only halfway through. Why don't you get up and have a sandwich? Like, my inner editor is the most critical editor I'm ever going to meet. And my inner editor wants me to sit on the sofa and not write. And
all of us, yeah. That I credit the muse, and I never blame the muse, but when the muse comes and gives me an idea, even if I'm doing something else, like, just do it. Just do it. And it's not the muse's fault if it doesn't get done. It's just mine, because again, I'm naturally lazy, but still manage to get a lot of work out. And like you say, it's focus, and it's important to get paid for things that you finish. And if you don't finish them, if they're still on your computer in your drawer, you don't get paid for them. And that's no help. And the idea doesn't get out to the world. And if the muse is kind enough to come up and give me a good idea, I listen. But again, that inner editor, it's great. It's a great way to shut off your inner editor, because the muse does not say, this sucks, but you've got to write the idea anyway. The muse says, write this idea.
And that's where like a supportive workshop also comes in, because if you're in a supportive workshop and people like your work, and they can tell you that it's good, rather than you having that inner battle about it. And the other thing too is, if you're in a workshop and they really know your writing, they'll be able to tell you what's good about it and also what's not working in that. And I can take that criticism much more than I take my own, because if I get critiqued by others, it makes me want to go and fix and revise and follow that direction. If I'm critiquing myself, it makes me want to sit on the sofa.
We are our own harshest critics. A couple of quick questions. You're still a social worker, correct?
I still am. I thought I was going to retire in 2026, but I did the math wrong. So
yeah,
I'm still a social worker till 2030. But
God willing, and the creek don't rise.
I'm looking forward to retiring.
Dean here is on a lot of these calls because he really is working the steps to becoming a better writer, and he's asking the right questions. He's getting the information. He says, what's your process for giving your book its title?
I never start with the title. Occasionally with a poem I might, but like a poem, very often the poem is finished and I give it a title. And just something that makes sense. There's various rules that I ignore. You know, there's always these writer rules like never use an adverb. Well, why not? Never put the word love in a poem. Well, why not? Sometimes you can say it in a different way. The one I always heard was never use a one-word title for a poem. Well, I have
Oh,
many.
come on. Yeah.
I have many of those. So the process is it has to make sense, and it has to tie the metaphor together. So also in a poem, sometimes a title can fill in the blanks. Like if you're being really obtuse in a poem, and I never try to be, but sometimes, like for example, I have a title of a poem that the poem is written like someone giving clues in the $25,000 pyramid, the final round. You know, when they're saying like a wet blanket, a warm cup of tea. It's like things you blah, blah, blah. So I was writing a poem that was listing the lines like that. And the title basically had the title in a bracket said in $25,000 pyramid style. So that way I'm filling in the blanks. They don't know what I'm doing. They know what I'm doing now.
Yep.
And readers of poetry don't like to play Sudoku. They don't like to play Wordle. They don't like to figure it out. It's not an academic adventure that they
Right,
sit home and they read a poem and like, I'm excited. I've cracked the code. You have to, you know, at least let them know what it's about somehow. And titles will do that. For books, they just kind of come to me. Joe the Salamander, the novel, was easy title to come up with because it started as a flash fiction piece that I made a novel out of. And it made sense because Joe is a character on the autism spectrum, and he liked to wear Superman costumes to protect himself. And halfway through the book, something happens and he disregards Superman, and he ends up in a salamander costume, and he becomes Joe the Salamander. So that kind of tell all, which is actually is available as an audiobook earlier this month. So grab it on Audible.
Excellent. Yep. Nice.
And you know, sometimes you know the gods smile upon you. So I have Joe the Salamander as a ASD protagonist, and the book was published by
ASD?
autism spectrum disorder.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm a social worker. I like to throw
That's
those.
okay. I mean, for those who might not know in the audience, so
I would have to put what it meant in the title of the poem.
we don't have to be obtuse.
So the first reader from when you go to a publisher or a magazine, there's levels of reader, and like it's just to weed things out because generally they're getting much too much work to really review. So the first reader of Joe the Salamander was on the autism spectrum, so he greenlighted it. And in terms of like cultural assimilation, I really, really had to be careful having an ASD character as a protagonist. So I figured, well, here is a first line editor saying it's good enough to publish. That's a really strong sign. And then the audiobook, I used the process that Dale taught me about, ACX, and I got 30 or 40 auditions to do the audiobook.
Wow.
And the one that captured, and I had a certain requirement in my mind what I wanted it to sound like. And the one I captured my mind, that captured me, was she wrote to me and said, this book intrigues me because I am on the autism spectrum. And I checked out her bio. She's an actress in New York. And she read the book exactly as I felt an audiobook
Wow.
should be read. Not
That's
too
incredible.
fancy, not like she wasn't the star of the book. She wasn't overacted. She just read it in a nice, calming manner, as if like someone was like, you know, reading you a story. And that was really important to me.
I'm glad that process worked for you. But again, I recommend this to a lot of people because you control your story, where you don't if you sell it to a company, they do everything, and you might get somebody that can't even pronounce a place name in Maine, as I had an issue with some other authors, and you get control over what they sound like, if they're doing it right, and you get final control. That's terrific.
Yeah, and it was great. It's a great process. And you know, if you're part of Audible, you can get it for free. It's part of that plan. So I mean, it sounds strange, the author recommending his own book, but I've written 18 books, and out of the 18, I really recommend Joe the Salamander.
Excellent. How do you vet a publisher?
Um, I use the Poets and Writers webpage, and there's all kinds of sorting devices.
Yeah.
But you know, sometimes it's as simple as, you know, that the book does not look like a book. It looks cheap. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't look like a book you'd see at a bookstore. So I automatically don't want to work with them. They could be a great outfit,
Right.
you know, do great promotion, but the cover is very, very important.
Yeah, that's the first checkbox. You know, does this look like a professional book, like a
Yeah.
professional company? How long have they been around? Who else do they publish? What's the other stuff? Let's look at it.
And I bet just like that. And I see, like, does anyone I know been with this publisher? And then I might do stuff like Google the reviews to the book. If there are no reviews available, then I know, well, if I go with this person, I'm doing my own promotion.
Right.
I
Well,
don't mind.
in most cases, you're doing your own promotion anyway, most of the time. But it's nice if they at least list you in a catalog, if they at least recommend you for awards, if they at least put out the word in other places. So yeah.
Yeah, and so like,
Go ahead.
and also I bet, have they been around a long time?
Right.
If
More
it's
than yeah. If are they starting up or have they been around for 15 years? You know, that's a difference.
Because there is a risk. You can sign a contract with a company that's just started, which is fine, but very often that book is, you know, wrapped up for 7 years, and if the publisher suddenly stops or has a tragedy in their life, if it's a small press, they suddenly don't want to deal with being a publisher anymore. Guess what? Your book sits there for 7 years, and
Well, I've had to get my books, the rights back to my books, which I've done. Yeah, it happens.
And the other thing that, you know, if they're around a while, you can establish a nice relationship for them. I always make sure, like, you know, if anything happens to you, can I have the files? I mean, I'm not going to put it out myself, but I want to have this book that was published. I mean, after like 10 years, you're not going to sell very many copies of a book that's 10 years old, to be honest.
Right. Have a sunset clause in it where the rights automatically revert if you don't get X amount of dollars per year.
Yeah. Or upon death, you know, like you want to have, like, I want to have my files and how they're laid out, because I don't want to necessarily have to start that process by scratch.
Yeah, poetry's tougher too. The layout for that is sometimes more complex than it is for a simple novel text file of chapter, 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 chapter.
And the other thing, poetry and Kindle are not good friends.
Yeah.
So I don't like having my books of poems on a Kindle. It changes the line like in poetry, every word is important. So the line breaks get changed, and like only because it's all the poem that's printed to fit, as they say, and that's not right. That's not the intention, you know. It's not the intention of the work.
Yeah. Do you connect with Bagels and Bards in Cambridge and Doug Holder, who runs that?
Doug Holder published my very first poem, and he published my very first chapbook. So,
yeah, great guy, and he does a lot with all the writers, and again, Cambridge oriented, and getting the word out about poets and writers and the literary scene in Boston. Excellent. Dean's got a question. Since you brought up Superman, he says, are you a big Superman fan, which is his favorite, and where do you draw inspiration for your work?
Oh, I'm a big fan of Superman, and I like Spider-Man too. Like, I always thought Spider-Man was super cool, but Superman, one reason I probably was a fan of Superman, and I actually hit this point in the book, is that there are so many different Supermans. There's the Christopher Reeve, there's the George Reeves Superman in black and white, who had the build of my father, which is, you know, very un-Superman like. So yeah, I like to, you know, and there's also Super Friends and the cartoons. Like, I liked all of the morphs of Superman, and Joe as a child relates to Superman, and he buys into all of the forms of Superman. So to answer that question would be yes. The inspiration for my work, that's a hard one to answer, because I just want to make sure that I keep my creative mind active. And if I keep my creative mind active, that things will hit me, the muse will hit me, and I am inspired to finish my thoughts. Because, my creative brain is like a muscle. And, I need to continue to work it. If I don't work it, suddenly I'm only lifting 40 pounds again. So I need to continually work it to continually get the inspiration. And there's no shortcuts. Like very often people say, how do I become a better writer? You become a better
By
writer.
writing better. Yeah.
Like, duh. Like, right. Because there's only so many stale metaphors, so many writing mistakes you can make. And if you make those mistakes, you won't make them again. So the more you write, the better you're going to get. You can't help getting better. And there's no shortcuts. There's no steroids to the creative brain muscle. You have to work it out. And it's pretty painless, try to write every day, try to get feedback. Another way I was lucky was I surrounded myself that had a higher writing education than I did in the early 2000s, early when there were bulletin boards on the internet that everyone joined for social media or social stuff. I joined this writers group called Scrawl, the Writers Asylum, and it was filled with published authors and authors with MFAs. And, we wrote every day, and if you posted something, it automatically got a critique. And I learned so much. People were just very blunt in saying, like, you said the character was like this and you have them doing this. That doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. And, later on, I'm able to catch that mistake, the consistency. If I hear them, I'm having verb tense disagreement, then I make note of that and I can fix that mistake. I'm writing out all my bad stuff. And then later on, I got the free MFA in poetry from basically I was dating and living with someone that was getting her MFA at Lesley University. And she basically would say, this is what I've learned in school. This is what your poem.
You're reading your notes going, yeah, excellent. And I'm not paying for mine.
She became one of my readers. Having a good reader of your work is so important as writing. And a good reader is not necessarily a good writer. It's someone that reads your work, understands your work,
and a good critiquer,
better. So this person was able to be like, you know what? Let me tell you about line breaks. Let me tell you about stanza and line lengths. Let me tell you about various forms. Let me tell you, you shouldn't rhyme through half the poem and then drop the rhyme scheme. Very basic stuff, but I got the cheapest MFA and I learned so much, and I've learned so much in my writing from other people.
You must have had a very thick skin, though, to be able to take that kind of criticism so at the start, mostly of your career. I mean, a lot of people are hesitant about submitting anything and afraid of criticism. And I'm like, well, that's the skin you got to develop.
I wanted to get better. And if I didn't need other people, it's so important to have that desire to get better. And even something, say so this the Scrawl critique group, right? I might get 20 people saying this is great. And I myself, imagine that, might think that it's pretty good. And then I'll get one criticism and immediately I'm defensive. Well, everyone else says this and But, small sample size. If 1 out of 20 people see an inconsistency in a story or in a novel, guess what? When you sell the novel and hundreds of people are reading it, you're having a large number of people.
That's 5% of your audience right there.
And you don't want that bad press. You don't want that bad word of mouth. You don't want, because there's nothing you can do about that except write well. And, sometimes you have to listen to others and do things against your will. My first novel was called The Thursday Appointments of Bill Sloan, and it was about an unethical therapist. And he saw 5 characters, and that was kind of their story and his relationship with them. And originally it was 6 characters.
In search of an author.
The book was accepted, and the publisher said, you need to cut one of the characters. And
Why?
you
Why
know,
did they say that?
because, well, my first response was, how dare you tell me this? This is my
These are
book,
real people.
my work. Don't touch my work. But then I realized what they realized. One of the characters really didn't move the plot. It didn't function in the book. It was interesting. What the character did and said, what he was like, was interesting to me, but it did not move the book or move the plot. And so I reached a compromise and I said some of the more interesting sections of that character, I transferred to other characters just so I could have my own little ha-ha about it, but still.
Yeah, well, that works. I mean, that's a way of getting in. You've still got the essence of the character, and amongst others, you kind of farmed out pieces of it, but you also made the editor happy. You also took the criticism, worked with them to make the book more in line with what they thought was a more sellable book.
Yeah, and you hear it all the time, especially like, Stephen King. Stephen King never likes the adaptations, or rarely likes the adaptations of his books to movies. And the bottom line is, if you get a movie deal from your book, you have to be willing to accept that it's not going to be the book.
Yeah, if you sign the check, just accept that it's theirs, and they're gonna mess it up. So whatever.
And in a smaller scale, when you get your book accepted by a publisher, you have to accept the fact that it might be changed in some way. If you're able to accept those changes, you'll be published by that publisher. If you're not willing to be accepting of those changes before you sign the contract, you can shop elsewhere.
Go indie.
Or go indie, exactly.
Right. I get my work published the way I want it because that's the way I want it. That's the story I want to tell. And I mean, I will get feedback. I will use an editor, but essentially it's the story I want to tell. And if they say put a dog in it, I'm like, no, if I wanted a dog in it, I'd put a dog in it. I don't agree with that sort of thing that like they don't really know what's sellable. They think they know what's sellable, but they don't. And if you're telling the story the way you want, that's you.
Do you have a reader of your work? Do you have a trusted reader?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I do use beta readers. Brent asked, I think we've already answered this. Do you ever work on more than one book at a time? And you said you like to focus on that one novel.
Yeah, when I'm writing a novel. So, but to answer his question, yes, because I'm never working on this is going to be a poetry manuscript. I don't really have, I mean, subject themes do come out, but like, currently with the novel and the poems and flash fictions I write, I probably have 70% of my next book of poetry, and I probably have 20% of a book of short stories.
Oh,
So,
okay.
okay. So I guess, and I'm also working on a memoir. So currently,
and
I'm
the
working
novel,
on 4 books. I have 4 manuscripts started, and I'm also working on a screenplay, so make that 5. And
been there.
so, but I mean, at this moment, micro, I'm only working on 1. Macro, I've got 5 things going.
Yeah, I'm amazed that some people work so slowly and like come out with that one novel every 7 years, and to them that's an acceptable output. And I'm like, well, wow, okay, we've got too many ideas to wait that long for that.
Well, I also realize that my process might not be other people's process.
Exactly. If that makes them happy, if that's the way they work, that's fine.
And
now,
if people want to look at, spend an hour on every sentence,
or every word,
gonna have some pretty good sentences.
Yeah, if they know what they're doing and they practice enough. Yeah, I wrote 12 words today. Well, that's more than a lot of people write, but if they're good words, that's great. But then you go and change those words tomorrow, and it's like, You run a literary writers group. So tell us about that, please.
Okay, it's a group that, back when the world was different in 2020.
Yeah, the before times.
I got an email from Anna David, and Anna David is she works as a publisher. She's a writer. She makes a good living as being a writer. And so I known her for years. Like I think we were on like MySpace together or one of those early ones.
Wow.
So I get an
We're
email
old.
saying, "Hey, I'm starting a writers group. We're going to meet daily. It's for accountability. I would love to have you in it." So I said, "Okay, that's fine." And so Anna ran it, and then Anna started to appoint people to run it. And it came my time for appointment in about, I think it was in 2022, and I took off with that. And Anna decided she didn't want to work with it at all and says, "You know what, Tim, I'm going to give you the group. You know, you can charge whatever fee you want." And what we do is some of these folks I've been with for 4 years from all around the country. We meet every day. They've become friends of mine. They've put out a bunch of books. And they've all kind of become experts in promoting, in creating their own brands, in creating careers around their books, as the book came first and it launched them into careers. And what we do is we have accountability check-ins Monday through Thursday. So the first 10 minutes of group, anyone want to check in? What do you want to be accountable for? What are you doing today? And then the hour runs out. We check back in and we find out people's progress, what they did. And, people want to be accountable and they want to be able to tell you like, "Hey, I wanted to write 700 words and I wrote 850, or I wrote 550, but I'm happy with them." And then on Fridays, we have special Fridays, and Dale's appeared on a special Friday. So we have guests in the publishing and writing industry. They'll talk about craft, they'll talk about promotion, they'll talk about how to get on podcasts, they'll talk about all things writers. We will do hard critiques on another Friday of work that is submitted to the group a week in advance. And then we'll have reading days on another Friday that people get 5 minutes to read and they get a soft critique. I like that. And by having the hard critiques and soft critiques, you really get involved in the other people's books that are in your group. And then we also have quarterly goals meetings that we talk about your quarterly goals, and I take notes. And then we're going to do the next one on March 29th. And I'm going to look at my notes from December and be like, "This is what you wanted to do. Where do you stand? Do you still have that goal?" Etc. So it's great accountability. It's a great friendship. There's a lot of great information that happens in there. And it's $40 a month, less than a really crappy $1 cup of coffee a day.
Yeah, 2 pizzas.
Less than your Folgers that you make at home.
Have you noticed big ability jumps and quality jumps in the people doing that?
Oh, definitely. And the confidence jumps. I think one of the early lessons I got was, you have to, whatever you write, have some swagger about it. So the swagger actually is good for the promotion of your work, but it's also good for your writing, because if you've got that swagger and that confidence, your writing just comes out much better. So we've had people that, again, what good writing groups do, like somebody that the basics, you're showing, you're not telling, tell some more. Like, this is how you tell. This is an example of it. The other things, just the very basic, the nuts and bolts of writing comes out in these groups, and they all get better. And suddenly you see, based on the group's instruction, the next time they present, how much better crafted the piece is. It's really, really great. And we've had some wonderful people in our group. So Anna knows, she's also started out in California. So the original writing group had the assistant director of House MD, various TV shows in Nashville. He was writing his memoir. There was
So you take all kinds of writing, memoirs, scripts,
poetry,
novels, everything, short stories.
Yeah. And the original group also had Joey Buttafuoco's daughter.
Oh, wow.
Writing a great, she was a tremendous writer. Boy, her book never came out, but it was awesome. There are people that wrote recovery memoirs, so as that group morphed, it's more, I don't have those Hollywood connections. And so it's more like, people like me and Dale popping in every day, checking in, making sure that we're writing every day and, improving. And
So if
finding
somebody
out,
wants to join, how do they go about it?
I will give you my email in the chat.
Okay.
And so
Now,
that's,
as far as publishing, now you say you work with a lot of publishers. Are you also interested in independent?
I am interested, and this group, I guess I'm stuck on the group now, but I don't say do it my way. I say there are so many different avenues to travel now if you want to be published. You can indie publish.
My mantra is be happy in whatever you do, you know?
I mean, here's the steps. And Dale, let me finish my thought before you interrupt me after I say self-publishing. So here's the full realm. There's self-publishing that you do everything yourself and maybe don't even hire an editor, don't do anything. There's indie publishing where you can grab editors that you need, and you're both of those, they're very similar in a lot of ways, but indie publishing is probably a better term because you're independent. You can choose to hire an editor. You can choose to hire a book designer. You're putting it out, and you've got total control. So yeah, I'm 100% fine with that. There's boutique publishers that take the indie publishing away from self. In other words, you sign with them, you will pay them. They've got the whole toolbox there. I need an editor. I need a book cover. I need an ISBN number. They've got what they got what you need a la carte. And you might pay for the whole package, and you use what you use. It's different than vanity publishing. Vanity publishers, you give them your work. They give you a book, and they do absolutely nothing besides that except slap a cover on it. So like if you mistakenly wrote ASS in place of the word as, it's gonna show up as ass. That's just the bottom line. And then there's small publishers, which I go with. I still have a lot of control in that. I don't pay anything except the people. Like, I have an editor that I work with independently that I pay because she's good and she knows my work. And so even before I submit to a small publisher, I have her do a read through and an editing, and I pay her because it makes my works better. And I have really bad attention deficit disorder, and I can't read. I don't think anyone can read their own work 5, 6, 7 times and start catching new things. And it's nice to have a different set of eyes on it. So I submit to small presses because I don't have an agent. And to have an agent, it's interesting because agents don't want to help you get published. Agents want to make money. Publishers, big publishers, want to make money. So if you don't have a name, if you haven't been involved in a conspiracy, conflict, or been shamed publicly, or if you're not Stephen King, or if you're not won big awards like the Penn New England Award, the big publishers and the agents do not want you because you're a dime a dozen. No matter how great you might be, you're a dime a dozen. So I like the control that I have with a small press, and I like their model. I like that they print on demand, and I still had to gain some knowledge. Is the small press using print on demand on Amazon, or are they using Lightning Source? I mean, I prefer that whichever one uses Ingram is the one I want to go with, because Ingram stocks Amazon and Ingram stocks bookstores. But if you're indie publisher or your small press publisher is just using the Amazon print on demand, it goes to Amazon. And Amazon. Like, bookstores have trouble ordering it, or they'll stay away from it because Amazon is not their friend. They're their enemy. So why would a bookstore want to order Amazon as their distributor? So Ingram for me, is always a better bet.
Have you been happy with the results from your small presses?
Oh, I've been very happy with them, and I've formed bonds with all of them. I really enjoy the small press. And just because it's a small press doesn't mean it's easier to get published. A small press will definitely publish less books a year. Some of them only publish 1 a year. I've been happy to have that like mom and pop relationship with the editor that might be there, and with the publisher, and with the person that promotes it. And like, going through the cover design with them, and even telling them look, like I know, like telling my last publisher, I know how to work the algorithms on Amazon to get a #1 bestseller. This is how to do it. And they were like, I don't know if that's gonna work. I said, believe me, it works. And I ended up with when The Best of Timothy Gager came out, it was the #1 bestseller in like 5 Amazon categories. And whether it's legit or not, I can say I'm a #1 bestseller on Amazon. It's not a lie.
That's right. Yep. Well, great. I'll have to hire you for to do a couple for me. Libraries and bookstores. How do you get into those?
Ingram can stock them, but very often you can ask your friends to recommend it. Like some of your friends are just like, oh, I don't want to buy your book. I said, I'll be like, well, would you read the book? Like, is this something you'd be interested in reading? Because very often, a lot of my friends are like, they're a nightstand full of books away from reading yours.
Yeah.
So, I ask people to recommend my book to the library. I will do some legwork to walk into various libraries and say, hey, let me introduce myself. Here's the book. If you would like to, check it out and read it. And, I'm in various libraries, and that's fine. I have I love having books in libraries, but I also know, the bottom line is I want to sell a book, and I'm not that I'm like a capitalist pig, because, libraries are wonderful socialist
How
organizations.
dare you wanting money for the work that you sweated over?
Socialism in libraries, how dare you? But if a library takes it, I'm just as happy. You can sell a lot of books to book clubs. You can sell a lot of books when you do lectures. You can sell a lot of books when you appear at universities. It's that's really key. I sell the most books I ever sell is just by being a good politician and meeting people. Like that is, and meeting a lot of people. And I can't see you because you're behind that Zoom screen, but if this was a face-to-face event, not on Zoom, I probably would have a better chance of selling books. Here, I just have to interest you, right?
Yep.
So this is from a writer's perspective. So here I have to interest you to buy my book. If I'm appearing at Tewksbury Library and you're all there you have to say no to me. And people don't like to say no, except to me.
I know a lot of people who say no.
But you know what? People aren't this, and to stay along that theme, people, if you're a beginner writer or a first-time writer, and they've never heard of you, they aren't necessarily buying your book or buying what the book is about. They're buying you. If they like you, they're going to buy the book. I hope you guys like me. Do you like
I always
me?
ask people,
Do you really like me out there? Do you like me?
Not do you like me? I say, what do you like to read? And I listen to them and I go, okay, if you like that kind of thing, either I have something or I know somebody else who has something in that field. And I'll see if that's something that they would like. And then, like you say, but it's also a piece of yourself. Yeah, Carla Negger's a top-selling mystery writer. She said the same thing at a conference last year. She said, because I was next to her at the booksellers table, and she's looking over the books, and I point to mine, and I go, oh, I hear this one's very good. And she looks at it, and she looks at me, and she goes, that's yours, right? I go, yeah, it is. And she goes, okay, I'll buy it. I'm like, blown away. And she tells the audience, because if you're a nice person and you've got something in the field that they're interested in, and she holds up my book and says, there he is right there, and I just got his book. And I was like, I love you forever. Thank you so much.
And people like deals too. So say I'm doing a book event and a book fair, and people are showing interest, but they're just being nice, right? And I said, well, what do you think? And they'll say, well, I'll probably go home and I'll buy it on Amazon.
Yeah, you won't.
And I always say, and I know in my head, well, they're not going to buy the book, but I always say, I said, well, you may, or you may not. And then I give them a deal. I said, if you buy it here, I'll knock a couple bucks off.
Right. As long as I've covered the cost of printing, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would rather have a reader than try to make, extra money off that.
I
Bookstores,
agree.
how do you approach bookstores?
Um, let's see, it depends on the bookstore, right?
Hmm.
There are some bookstores that you can donate a book for free, and then if it is bought off their shelves, it automatically reorders if you're on Ingram.
Oh, so you go in and you place your book into bookstores without saying anything.
No, I ask permission. Yeah. And then if they say no, then I just put it in there. No, just kidding.
Yeah. Always
Just
ask
kidding.
and then do it anyway, right?
You can also consign books. It's not my favorite mode because the bookstore, it's
Yeah, you don't make any money that way, but at least it's a way
the
to get
bookstore
it in
gets
there
money,
and
yeah.
get it on a shelf.
And the bookstore makes money for doing nothing. And sometimes they do nothing, like not even keep the inventory. And sometimes they do nothing by not even telling you when they're destroying the books. So there is a risk of losing money as an author. If you don't have a good spreadsheet that says, okay, I consigned a book to the booksmith on March 21st and for 3 months. So if I don't appear again June the 17th, I'm never going to see the books that didn't sell.
Oh, you're so organized. That's good. I know.
I could lose
I've
10 books that way.
I know I've got 33 books out, and it's just difficult to keep track of who's got what, where, and how many. And then they sell some, they send you a check, and they don't tell you which ones they sent the check for, which ones they sold. So it's difficult, but at least it's a way. People say you can't get independent books in the bookstores, and I go, well, you can, and here's my list. So
you definitely can.
Yeah, Tim, how do you promote your work?
Well, I'm not reinventing the wheel, but I'm learning a few things.
The Amazon algorithms are good. That's an excellent way to do it because once you're listed, when somebody enters a search term and you come up, that's the way to get seen.
Yeah. So promote the book. I do the social media game, but that very often doesn't lead to sales.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an interesting study that comes up that says the number of followers you have on Instagram and Facebook does not lead to increased sales. So right now, I have a nice crowd of people that buy my books. They're small and mighty, but it's pretty much, I will sell X amount of books just if I say, hey, I've got a new book. But that took years of work. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to exhaust your social media
buy my book.
Exactly. And because it's so transparent and it's boring. It's annoying. It's like getting a phone call from out of the blue. It's like getting one of those sales calls.
Have you thought of reshingling your roof?
Yeah, chances are people aren't logging onto social media because, oh my God, I found the next book to read. So I do that just to let the people know that follow me that I do have something if they're interested. I do a lot of appearances. I do a lot of readings. I always find that also appearances, if you're the only writer, is better than readings. Like if you can get yourself in an indie bookstore at a table, that's the best. If you can instead of appearing at a book festival with 20 other writers, if you can get yourself a table at a town celebration, if you can get yourself a table at a farmer's market.
That's what I do.
You are the only author in town, and the people that read books, what are you competing with? The jelly next to the table next to you?
I did a Christmas fair just up the road.
Hey,
and I was surprised. I didn't think I'd do anything, but because again, people come by and go, oh, it's Christmas. They make good gifts. Hey, here you go. Great. Let me grab a couple of these.
Yeah. A good example of that was a number of years ago, I went to the Baltimore Book Festival, and if you've ever been to the Baltimore Book Festival, it's booth after booth after booth after booth on a line. And there's hundreds of booths. So if you're, if you're interested in books and you're at the festival and you're walking down the block, it's kind of like the sideshow barkers. You're at the circus, here, throw the ball and break the bottles, and come over here, spin the wheel. And that's what it sounds like. So I didn't know that at the time. And I realized, I've been here a couple hours and I've sold one book and I'm competing
Mm.
with all these other authors and they're all equally legitimate for selling their books. So down the hill, they had a music festival going on as well. So I left my booth. I left like 4 books on the booth and I said honor system. And I left a jar there. And people love that actually. And I walked down to the bandstand with a backpack full of books. I also had printed out like my bio and accomplishments and little blurbs about the
Little
book.
sell sheet. Yeah.
And I walked up to people at the music festival and I said, hey, there's a book festival up the street. And I handed them the piece of paper. I said, what do you think? And they said, oh, it sounds really good. And I said, you want to buy it? And I sold like a couple hundred books at the music festival, at a book festival. And then when I went up to my booth, I had sold 1 on the honor system and they shortchanged me. So there's that. So the story continues, right? So the person that had the booth next to me was like, I can't believe you sold that many books and you did it like down there. Like that's wonderful. I want your secrets. I'll buy you dinner. I said, okay.
Okay.
So I'm in the inner harbor of Baltimore. The book festival is over. And this pub was filled with like naval people. So I walked up to the head guy in charge. I said, look, this is how you sell a book. You just be personable. And I did the same thing I did at the music festival. I gave him the sheet of paper. I said, what do you think? He goes, I think me and the boys would all like this book. And I thought,
wow.
Bar. I mean, that's luck,
Yeah, but that's genius, though. It's putting yourself out there in a new way and say, I'll take a chance. I can get rejected. So what?
Yeah. And if you're getting into the book business to make it your career and your money maker, don't quit your day job. Like, I mean, I sold a lot of books, but I only like what I made last year.
The profit is razor thin, the margin. Yeah.
Yeah, I made $6,000 or $7,000 in book sales. That's nice. It's a nice chunk of change. It's a nice bonus, but I don't know how many of you can live on $6,000 or $7,000 a year. You really can't.
I'll be finding out soon when I retire. So
yeah. Do people have more questions in the chat?
Yeah, please, folks, enter your questions in because Timothy is a wealth of information.
And specific to your experience, you want to know something, not curious about me, but curious about your own journey.
Right. We have a lot of aspiring writers here. I know Dean is working on some things very diligently, and a few other people are as well. So I wish I'd had this resource when I was starting out. I mean, I didn't have people to contact who would give me and do an info dump on everything they know about the publishing and writing biz. I mean, we would have to go through it the hard way, read writing books and writing magazines and kind of comb through it and see the same information over and over until it was absorbed in our DNA.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is like, write because you love it, and write because you see your improvement.
And do it because it makes you happy. Yeah, Beatrice says you're a great storyteller and says, thank you for sharing your story. Who are some of the authors you like currently? Do you have time to read, first of all?
I do. I read a lot of memoirs. And so, I'll tell you who I'm reading right now. It's right over here. Come with me.
Walk this way.
Because I disappear into the crowd. Whoa.
Yeah, you came right out of the wall. It was great.
Here we go. So since I host a literary series, I'll very often buy the guests' books that are going to appear. And this is, I really like this, Necessary Deeds by Mark Wish. And it's a wonderful book. And even says advanced review copy, not for sale. So again, that's the advantage of being there. And my book club is reading, and I really love this, Kristen Hanna's The Nightingale.
Oh yeah, she's very popular right now. A lot of people are mentioning
600 pages, baby.
Woo! It'll take a weekend.
My first book was called The Damned Middle, and it was an electronic book with 8 short stories in it. Yeah, I went away on paternity leave. I had sent them the query, and back in the days, in 1999, I didn't even have email at my house, and I went back into work, and there was the email. We've accepted your book for publication. I always recommend the last books, the first book, and the publisher actually named that one. So yes, so there was the damn middle, and my first book of poetry was The Same Corner of the Bar, because at the time, I'm in recovery now. At the time, I was not in recovery, and I wrote a lot of poems in this one bar in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Larry would like you to talk about getting short stories published.
Fantastic. Okay. Duotrope is your friend. So
And Submission Grinder.
yeah, and they will tell you, those websites will tell you who's open for submissions. They'll lead you to the websites of the publication. They'll even sort by genre of short story, and you can also sort by length. Like some publishers don't want anything more than 1,000 words. Some don't want anything more than 500 words. Some are open to 10,000 words. So it's really important that you follow the instructions in order to get published in short stories. And make sure you have that hook in the first sentence and the first paragraph. That is so, so important.
Larry said he uses Duotrope. The thing is, they charge, and Submission Grinder does exactly what Duotrope does, but it's free. So
Yeah.
I do use Submission Grinder and recommend it to people. So
So I'm old school because I haven't used Duotrope in years, because right now, if I'm getting published, it's because someone's writing to me saying, hey, we've not heard
nice.
from you for a while. We'd like something of yours. Curious about the algorithms.
Yeah, that's Diane.
Here's the hint. Pre-sales don't help your algorithms. What helps your algorithms is you hold off and you organize your core group of readers to buy your book on the first day it's released. And your algorithm, it tricks Amazon and other distributors into thinking that, you've heard of small sample size. They don't know what the algorithm doesn't know what small sample size is. So they're anticipating
Buzz!
So if you do enough on day one, your book's going to appear at #1 in your subcategories for 5 to 7 days. Amazon, it's important to have subcategories, like it might be like YA fiction, and those are the basic ones. When you submit your book or your publisher does it, they give you 3 subcategories that you can pick. But here's the hint on algorithms. Ask Amazon and have your publisher ask Amazon for extra subcategories. Please, friend, I'm begging you, more subcategories, because the more subcategories you're in, especially the ones you ask for, the chances are your book's going to appear higher on that list. Some subcategories might only have, to be honest with you, 100 books in it. So automatically, if you sell one book, you've cracked the top 100. Woohoo! In YA fiction about farming and religion, whatever it might be. And here is the hint with that too. Once you trick the algorithms and you get your reviews going, Amazon will suggest your book with other bestsellers. It does it automatically. There's no person involved. It's Amazon AI. So maybe if you play the algorithm right and you master it and you're #1 in some subcategory that's mystery and science, and you're #1 or in the top 5 for like 3 weeks, suddenly Stephen King's book, which might be mystery and science subcategory, when Stephen's book comes up on a page, maybe we suggest your book. So it really, really helps for not just to have that boost to say you're a #1 writer, which helps sales, but also how it's suggested through these sites, because, like you see how it happens, right? Like, I bought running shoes the other day and like, maybe we suggest running shorts. I'm like, no.
No, you may not.
No.
Okay, are you a pantser or a plotter?
Am I a what?
A pantser or a plotter?
What is a pantser?
A pantser is one who writes by the seat of your pants. You don't have everything mapped out. And a plotter is like, okay, I got my spreadsheet, I got all my notes, I know exactly what's going where, and then I just write it.
I'm a semi-plotter. In other words, before I start a longer piece of work, I kind of know the beginning, the middle, and the end is going to sort of be like, and then the structure of the book takes shape. When I am about halfway through a book, I fully plan it. I plan each section, and they may, if you're doing your crappy first draft, they may not connect.
Mhm.
In other words, I am finishing the first rough draft of my novel, The Shooter, and I'm really excited that I'm going back and connection the sections and connection the subplots, which I didn't do. I just kind of threw the stuff out there. Move the plot, move the plot, move the plot. Now I'm working on the characters. I'm working on very subtle stuff, like the therapist in the story has a coffee cup that says, I am not your savior, coffee is, which I was greatly amused that I came up with that. So that's the fun part. But I do need to plot at some point. And my first novel, I'll tell you, the first novel I tried failed and never saw the light of day. Not because I didn't plot it, I didn't know how to plot it. And not because I didn't plan it, because I didn't know how to plan it. So I just tried to write it, and I had to fail at it to be able to write a novel that worked. And the failure was, I finished everything in 30,000 words, and you can't have a 60,000 word novel with 30,000 words of filler. And I tried to fill it, and I tried to add extra stuff after the fact, and it just didn't make any sense. It basically was it was a poop show, pretty much. And but again, like I did with the you can't have 6 characters. Out of the failed novel, I lifted the main character who appears. He appears in The Shooter, and some of the actual paragraphs from the failed novel I lifted, just so I'd be like, you know what? In my head, wasn't a total waste, right?
Important note, folks, don't throw anything away. Save even your junk stuff, because sometimes you can mine through that sludge and find little nuggets of gold.
And it was a character I didn't have to develop. I knew the character. It was a failed novel. I knew the character. I knew what he looked like. I knew how he acted. I knew his name was Lucky. I knew everything came up roses for him most of his life until it didn't, till he was unlucky. And I used that in what I'm working on now. So like, that is, that's a big plus. And my first novel that was published, the Thursday Appointments of Bill Sloan, I thought it was going to be a novel in flash fiction because I used a lot of my flash fiction in it that hadn't been published. But then, it just kind of naturally expanded into the form it became.
Any career plans, or do you just go along with it? You don't have anything mapped out and say, well, I want to do this, and then this, and then this, and be here by this time?
I would like to have one of my screenplays and one of my books turned into a series or a movie. That's just a pipe dream.
Same.
It's very possible. I would love just to see it. And if anyone's out there, I won't ask for any money.
Tim and I, we're available. What are you using for script writing?
I am using, now I'm drawing a blank. What's the big one? I'll tell you in a second. It's the one that everyone uses. It was recommended to me, which is. Let me get back to you.
Okay, yeah, you can email. Diane wants to know if you like doing novels or short stories. Which do you prefer, or even poetry, or anything else, or memoir, or?
I love writing a good novel. I kind of lost my ability or interest in writing the traditional 3,000 word short story. So flash fiction is different, and I enjoy writing flash fiction much better than traditional short stories. But I love doing the novels because I've figured it out. And like, it's a whole one day at a time thing. As a person in recovery, I'm a full believer of one day at a time. So I know if I work on the novel one day at a time, I'm going to have a novel at the end. My first novel, I didn't know that. My first novel was like,
right, you don't know forever. Anything. Will this ever end? Will I be successful? Well, and then at the end you're like, well, no, that one didn't work, but now I know how to write a novel. Folks, we're getting towards that time when Robert likes to call it end. So if you've got, Bella wants to know, what is flash fiction?
It depends on who you're defining it as, and who's defining it. What I learned is flash fiction is any short story that's less than like 1,000 words or less.
1,000 words is the usual. Yeah. Some
And,
people will say 1,500, but and there are
500.
varying lengths depending on what the editors want. But yeah, it's a short story.
And I just final draft is what I use. So
Final draft. Okay.
The short story. But the advantage of using a flash fiction is you can do the story arc as a traditional short story, you know, building, fall. You can make it like short and just be like the whole thing shoots across the page. It's flat, but it's exciting. You can make it into make a whole narrative poem into a piece of flash fiction. You have so many more ways to use craft within flash fiction. And I would recommend The User's Guide to Flash Fiction, which came out about 15 years ago, and it's got a chapter by some of the best flash fiction writers in the country, and what style or craft or form they were using, and they give you a little lesson on that form, and then they give you a story by that author. So it's a wonderful book.
And I'll also recommend, we had Carolyn Russell on this show a few months ago in December, I believe, and she has an excellent book of short stories. So people definitely check that out. Wasn't it Death and Other Survival Strategies? And folks, final questions for Tim here. So The User's Guide to Flash Fiction. Okay. I'm going to check that out.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
And see, folks, you know, the nice thing is I've been doing this a long time. And even when I talk to other people about this stuff, I learned so many new things, and you never stop learning. That's the great thing about what we do. It is the continual education for the rest of your life. You never stop learning. Tools change, tastes change, all kinds of things. Yourself changes, your work habits. You might write in the morning or at night or afternoons or 1 hour in the afternoon. You never know. And your schedule might change. But the fact is, if you keep writing, what Tim said, it's like a muscle. Your muscle gets stronger. The more you write, the better you get at it, because you just get stronger and better at it. You screen out the bad stuff more and more. Tim, thank you so much for appearing tonight. This has been very helpful. And recommend a book on memoir writing. Okay, you should be good at that.
A book. It's funny. I use a memoir writing guide, which, and if anyone's interested, just email me and I can send you the guide. But I read a lot of memoirs, and you know, your basic guide is you start either with the biggest tragedy of your life and then you build from that, or you start with your greatest success and then you build up to the tragedy and then back up to the success. And chapter 2 is always like, my childhood in Reno, Nevada was. Like you have your family history as chapter 2. So the first chapter is always like tragedy or triumph. Second chapter is always like, you know, I was born in a farm in Dayton, Ohio, or Reno, Nevada, you know, and, you know, just follow that form and it works really well. You can actually go to Anna David's website, and she's got the guide I use is free on her website. So that's
great. Again, thank you. And folks, connect with Tim on email, any of the social media platforms that he'll respond to. Check out his books, his poetry, and his advice. You can contact him with questions, I'm sure. And thank you so much, Tim, for appearing here.
Thank you so much for having me. I always love to talk about writing, and Dale, you're a great host. And Robert, thank you very much for opening up Tewksbury Library for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So folks, let's give Dale and Timothy a big virtual round of applause for a great discussion. As I said, I recorded tonight's program. You'll receive an email from me tomorrow with a link to the recording, a link to a feedback survey, and information about some other upcoming virtual programs. This group next meets on Tuesday, April 30th at 7 o'clock. The guest speaker is going to be author Kurt D. Springs, who is I think mainly a sci-fi author. He's also an adjunct professor up in New Hampshire. Seems like a fascinating guy, and I'm looking forward to hearing all about him. So All that information and a lot more will be in the email. I'll also include a link to Tim's website in the email as well.
And
So
Robert,
Yep.
Robert, feel free to stock my book in the library because I told these folks that that's what we do.
He will.
Yeah,
as a
so
matter of
I
fact.
actually do that. Because this came together a little late, I haven't purchased it yet, but I will certainly purchase your books afterwards. So I would say on or around April 1st, we'll be ordering your books here at the library. So
On April
That's
4th.
some cruel April Fool's joke. I know.
no. Let's say April 2nd then, okay? So then you'll believe me.
And I'll
Thank
come
you,
in and
sir.
cut out
Thank
the
you,
last few
Robert.
pages so people will be like, what? Wait.
There you go. So thank you all so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their night. Thanks again, Timothy. Thanks again, Dale.
Thank you guys very, very much. Thanks for attending, everyone.